Hi, my name is Lee Leng and I'm the analyst at RHB Investment Bank. I cover the regional plantation sector where I look at Malaysia, Indonesia and Singapore. Firstly, just to clarify, when we refer to the sector here, the plantation sector here, we're referring to the palm oil sector. So in Malaysia, obviously we also plant other crops like paddy, rubber and fruits amongst others. So to answer your question, I would say the answer is yes, but obviously this cyclicality has evolved over the years. So if you look at 15 to 20 years ago, the sector was really very predictable in its cyclicality. Every 3 to 4 years there will be an upcycle followed by a down cycle after it. But now with the onset of climate change, I think this timeline has become a lot less predictable, especially with El Nino and La Nina affecting us almost every year now. Of course, if you add to that, the geopolitical risks that are rising now, which affects global commodities, the cycle is becoming a lot shorter and the price movements a lot more volatile. The palm oil sector is definitely important to Malaysia. Although it doesn't really contribute very much to GDP, I think it's only about 3 to 4%, but it is important in creating employment for about 1 million jobs in the country, as well as enriching the smallholders. So Malaysia produces about 20 to 25% of global palm oil output, with Indonesia producing the lion's share at around 55 to 60%. Well, before we go into the keywords, I think it's important to understand the process. So in simple terms, a palm oil tree is a perennial crop, which means it produces fruit all year round. So the fruit is produced and harvested and brought to a palm oil mill, which is where the oil is extracted. So once that is done, the oil is sent to a palm oil refinery, which is where the oil is, as the name suggests, refined into cooking oil, which we use every day. So once the products are refined, they can be further processed at an oleochemical plant or a specialty fats plant to produce a multitude of products. So there are many uses for palm oil, and that would include for food like cooking oil, instant noodles, margarine, peanut butter, chocolate, etc. It's also used to make cleaning products, so makeup, moisturizers and even vitamins. So really the use of palm oil is very wide-ranging. So some of the keywords we normally would use would include FFB, which stands for fresh fruit bunch. That's the fruit that you harvest from the palm oil tree. Next would be FFB yield, which is expressed in tonnage of FFB harvested for every hectare of land. So OER refers to the oil extraction rate, and that is the percentage of oil that can be extracted from every ton of FFB harvested at the palm oil mill. And of course CPO refers to crude palm oil, which is the product that is extracted from the FFB at the palm oil mill. Palm kernel is the seed of the FFB, which also has a use as it also contains oil. So KER is the kernel extraction rate, which is the percentage of kernel that can be extracted from every ton of FFB harvested. PKO is also from the kernel, and that is the oil that you can extract, and it's called palm kernel oil. And of course age profile refers to the age of the trees and how old the trees are on the estate. So the prime age or the best age would be between 8 to 15 years, which is when the yield is the most optimal. Palm oil tree would start producing fruit around the age of 4 years. Okay, so the sector is a commodity, so it's really affected by so many things, including those that I mentioned earlier, like weather, geopolitical risk. So weather, of course, is easy to understand. If it's too dry or too wet, it would affect productivity. Of course, besides this, we also have to understand and find out about the trade policies of the importing countries who buy vegetable oils and also the exporting countries who sell vegetable oil. So we need to know, for example, what the other countries who produce competing oils and oilseed crops are doing. So US and South America, for example, they produce soybean. Are they planting more? Is the weather conducive? What about Russia and Ukraine? They're in the midst of a war, so are they able to export out their sunflower seed oil? So we also need to know what our major importing countries are doing. So, we need to know what their import policies are. Are there any new taxes that are coming up? Are they stocking up or are they destocking? What's the demand like in the country? Which ties in also with how the economy is doing. So we also then need to know what their currency is doing, how that would affect their buying power. What about trade barriers, like the new EU deforestation rule and the ban on palm-based biofuels in the EU? How is that going to affect demand? What about crude oil prices? This also has an impact on whether or not producing biofuel is financially feasible or not. So we need to then know what the outlook of crude oil prices are, especially with the ongoing war. So really the list is all-encompassing and it involves a myriad of factors. I think I covered a lot of the points in the earlier question about what information is useful, and that would also tell you about what the drivers and the risks are. So all those data points would then lead us to make a conclusion about the sector, and that generally would boil down to whether or not supply of global vegetable oils and CPO is enough to meet demand, whether there's going to be a comfortable level of inventory to survive any black swan events. So if there isn't enough supply and stock, then generally prices would likely move in an uptrend and vice versa. So quantitative factors that we would look at would include things like the age profile, the yield, the OER, the KR, and of course the cost of producing 1 ton of oil. So we would also need to look at their discipline of replanting, as that would determine if the trees will get too old and if there's new land that's going to come into maturity on a consistent basis. Qualitative factors, of course, we would look at things like management style and leadership, the level of risk-taking and risk averseness, how proactive they are when dealing with industry-wide issues, how often they engage with investors like us, and how their guidance pans out versus reality. Are they focused on short-term gain and forsaking long-term longevity? Things like that. So when we bring these factors together, we would be able to determine if a company is able to record consistent growth coming from stable improvements in FFB output, and which would come from age profile management, mechanization, efficiency initiatives, etc. So we need to be able to gauge the efficiency of the cost structure by looking at how management looks at costs. So, do they look at costs like input costs as optional or mandatory? Do they invest in R&D? How do they look at things like staff and labour retention? And of course, whether ESG is something that they believe in for safeguarding the future of the company. So ESG is an important issue these days and is really gaining more and more relevance, especially in the light of things like the EUDR. So just quickly, the EUDR basically stands for EU Deforestation Regulation. It's coming into place by the end of 2024 and basically bans any imports of palm oil into the EU that is produced out of deforestation. And besides that, the EU has also put a ban on palm-based biofuel, and that will also come into place within the next couple of years. They're also talking about putting a ban on products produced coming out from forced labour. So I would say that the palm oil sector is actually way ahead of other sectors when it comes to ESG disclosures and ESG awareness. We've got things like the Roundtable of Sustainable Palm Oil, which is the RSPO. We've got the MSPO and ISPO, which are basically the Malaysian and Indonesian equivalents. And these have actually been in place for quite a number of years. So really the palm oil sector is actually in the forefront of scrutiny, especially given the sensitive issues like deforestation, labour rights, emissions. So really an industry leader would need to get ahead of these issues by being proactive to ensure that they're actually fulfilling all the necessary requirements and then some.